about your background, but I know that it says here you were once teaching psychology. Tell us more about yourself. Was that here at Sheffield? Oh no, Nottingham-Trent. Yeah. And you've since moved into the study of folk song collecting.
Yeah, I'm interested in how people do things in spaces. Oh, right, yes. I'm interested in how the environment controls how people behave. Because I'd rather talk to you from here, but I'm not allowed to. And I've loved traditional music for 60 years now. So bringing those together a bit is what I do. And as someone who was a teacher and an academic for 40 years, I can't stop reading things and getting ideas and writing stuff. You can take the academic out of the institution, but it's still there in my brain. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. Let me rearrange myself a bit. Okay. Collecting as a social encounter. Having someone come around to your house or your pub, possibly unannounced, and asking you to sing old songs is a bit strange. It's not the kind of thing that happens all the time. So I think it's interesting to look at what happens in that socially, and I've got a few anecdotes about that. It is related to what sociologists and anthropologists do in studying subcultures. People turn up to ask questions and to do things with, deviant groups, minority groups, people who have unusual occupations and so on. And I looked at a student textbook, Guidance for Cultural Studies Researchers. I'll read out quite a bit of the text I put up on the screen, because I'm not sure that my slides are going to be clearly visible to everybody in the room, so I know it's a bit annoying, but it may be useful to some people. So, interviewing any set of participants is never simple. You have to think hard about initial contact, why they might agree to cooperate and what might deter them. Fears have to be allayed, cooperation must be made easy, good relations must be maintained. And interviewees are not just the providers of an account, they're likely to be gatekeepers and sources of further information or contact. That seems a pretty good description of what goes on in the collecting encounter, and any sensitive and socially skilled collector would be doing that kind of stuff, which is not to say that all collectors are doing that kind of stuff, and certainly the Victorian and Edwardian collectors didn't have the benefit of student textbooks giving them guidance about how to go about it. So I think it's interesting to look at what we can say from what we know about what goes on. Paul Mansfield and I started looking at that in terms of looking at understanding and sort of setting the scene in a presentation we did at the As I Roved Out conference in Limerick last year, and this is where we ended in that. It's useful to pay attention to the interaction between collector and source. Later collectors, like William Davis, do carefully note social details, but a fuller understanding might be gained by examining anecdotal observations from collectors' records, which we tried to do in that paper, and this is an opportunity for further research. Well, here's a bit more along the same lines. And I want to start out with an acknowledgement. I've tried to use mainly direct quotations as my evidence, but pretty well everything I've got here has come from secondary sources. And quite a few of those secondary sources are books written by people who are active in the traditional song forum, including people who are in the room today. So I just wanted to say thank you for the people who do the hard work of the primary research, which then enables me to extract little bits to wave my arms around about, because that's really important, giving us the data, and the more we've got of that, the better. Okay, here's some issues, I think, which arise in the the social interaction between collector and source. The first encounter, how does it start? Establishing role and identity, power and value, understanding and intention, setting, social ease, class and gender. Understanding and intention was what Paul and I talked about in the Limerick paper. What's going on here and why are we doing it? But what I want to talk about today is to give you a few quick examples which I think are to do with the first four: encounter, identity, power and value. The others are worth looking at, and of course class and gender have been discussed considerably in this. So, first encounter. I've got a couple of stories about how things start off. This is James Madison Carpenter in the 30s meeting Belle Duncan. I went and knocked at the door, and finally an elderly woman with a fine forehead and keen clear eyes and a beautiful shawl on her shoulder came to the door, and I told her who I was, and she looked me up and down and turned straight round to the turnips. When I was growing up in the 50s, I learnt that the right behaviour in circumstances like this was to say, "Not today, thank you," and close the door firmly but politely. And it looks like Belle Duncan was on the verge of doing that. But her daughter came downstairs, heard me talking, told her that Mr. Campbell had sent me. It was useful to have a contact, a justification, a background. And she said, well, she called her mother round and said, "I wondered if you knew," and I said, "I wondered if you knew any ballads." She said, I might know some. And actually Belle Duncan was a major source for Carpenter. 300 songs, hundreds of pages of laboriously typed out words. They spent days, I guess weeks, working on that. But that could have not happened if the daughter hadn't come down and maybe hadn't mentioned Mr. Campbell. Maybe Belle Duncan would have said, no, I don't know, don't want to do anything. So there's a vital moment there which can go well or can go badly. Here's another story about first encounters. Hamish Henderson had been told that Jeannie Robertson was a good singer and had been given an address, knew nothing about her. So he went along one afternoon, cold called, knocked on the door. Jeannie Robertson answered, obviously busy, obviously not keen to see him. And according to Henderson, he didn't know what to do, but the only thing he could think of was to burst out singing the Battle of Harlaw, which he'd heard from somebody a day or so before. And in his story, Jeannie Robertson looked at him and said, "Come away in, and I'll sing it the right way." He'd established that he was someone who's interested and involved, obviously someone who needed a bit of help. It's worth saying that Jeannie Robertson's account is different from that. It doesn't include him singing the song on the doorstep. She says she was busy, she was looking after children, and she didn't welcome the intrusion, but she did allow him in. Then he sang, and then they got off, into a relationship and collecting a lot of stuff. I find Jeannie Robinson's account actually more credible than Henderson's, but his story is a really good story, isn't it? And I think there's an issue here. We're talking about, we've got the folklore of folk collecting, but singing the song obviously made a difference, and I mean we know from lots of other people's accounts that going in there and singing a song can make a difference. I'll talk a bit more about that later. As far as identity goes, well, you need to establish yourself as someone who is part of whatever the general scene is, to some extent knows what's going on, and to be respect in the sense of just being allowed a hearing, being allowed presence, not being thrown out straight away. And you can see how Henderson, to some extent, did that. Here's an example from Margaret Steiner talking about her ethnographic research in a music community in Ireland. After having been in the village for some time and participating, as I was expected to do, in pub sing-songs, I sang a song that I'd learnt from one of the community's best singers. Not bad for a stranger, was one man's response. And she presents that as being part of her access to the musical community and allowing her to be regarded as a participant observer rather than just an observer. In my very limited collecting experience, going as an assistant to Alan Ward, who was recording some stuff for Topic in the west of Ireland, on one of our trips we went with Peter Webb, and we found if we turned up and Peter had the opportunity to sing, she generally sings something fairly well known but obvious, like the Galway Shore, and she's a very good singer, and she sang strongly and with commitment, but not too flashily. And I felt that was something where people then said or thought, okay, fair enough. And that was, something which established our appropriate identity. Obviously, if you can appear as someone who can help with the singer's own aims, I'll talk a bit more about that in the values section, that helps. And it may help to be an acceptable outsider. People have talked about how the relationship that Sharp had with his sources in Appalachia were much warmer and more generous in both directions than in England. And I think that's possibly because as an exotic outsider who's not linked to the local social and political and financial structure, you can just turn up and you're interesting because you're exotic and you're not threatening, and maybe you're allowed a little bit more generosity as a stranger. One should welcome a stranger. It was more comfortable on both sides, maybe, for Sharp in the States than in the UK. Equally, if you're someone inconsequential and harmless within a society, then that may help. You don't have any power structure behind you. I have a memory of reading Jim Carroll writing about this, and I haven't been able to trace it, so it may be a false memory, but I remember him saying that back in the days when he was young and he was collecting, that he and others often got identified as students, whether they were students or not, and he found that quite helpful, because students are, not people to worry about, people who are allowed to be interested in things, a bit irresponsible and so on. You don't suspect why they should turn up to find out about stuff, because that's the kind of stuff students do. And certainly when I was following Alan Ward around in West Cork, we were identified as lads, although we were both about 30 and we were pretty sober in our demeanour. But we partly, I think, because we were seen as being not married. You're not a real man unless you're married. That I think was helpful, because again we were lightweight, we were inconsequential. Why shouldn't people give us a hand? So I think being harmless is a useful thing to present. Then we've got power. People have written a lot about power in collecting and exploitation and so on, and certainly in the Victorian Edwardian era there are lots of issues about power and what's done with the material. But I think it's also worth thinking about the source singers have power because actually they are the people who have the resource which people are seeking for. And they have the power to cooperate or not cooperate, to withhold or to provide loads of stuff. And I've got a few examples here. This is from two old singer men. Harry Cox and other singers were operating within a social and moral frame that may have seemed irrelevant to the collectors. Harry did not like to sing traditional songs on Sundays. He was not alone in this, as Moran found when he started collecting. I never could persuade anybody, even some hard-boiled reprobate, to perform for me on a Sunday, at least not in Norfolk and Suffolk. Now, that may be in a social and moral frame that was irrelevant to the collectors, but it was understandable to the collectors, and the collectors couldn't really object to it. These are, men who are following their religious customs and preferences. You can't blame them for doing that, and I think that's quite important. They're putting it into a situation where it is acceptable to refuse or to accept as they choose. Similarly, someone just identified as Mr. Grantham and Henry Burser both refused to sing rude songs to that nice lady Lucy Broadwood, but they would sing them to men. That may have seemed, and from the writings nowadays you can certainly see that does seem silly to people like us, but they have their standards of proper behaviour and decency and decorum, and they will go with them. Fair enough. You can't complain about that. And I think you can't complain about that. It's something, it's a social structure which gives people the right to take back a bit of power. A more entertaining example is when Baring-Gould and Frederick Bussell went to see the widow Sally Satterley, who wouldn't sit down and sing for him. He was forced to follow her around as she worked, making notes as they went. And when Bussell sits down on the copper to make notes, her daughter lights the fire under him. This seems to me to be a way of saying, in polite terms, please go away. Again, that may not have been an easy thing to do in that social situation. But if these are busy women who are maintaining themselves and attending to their proper chores and work, and are so busy that they can't, really accommodate, you can't blame them for that. And again, that's a situation which gives them the power to cooperate or not cooperate. And at the limit, of course, you have the power to understand what's going on or not. I had no idea our old men were so stupid. No sooner do they see my paper and pencil than they become dumb. In fact, not only dumb, but sulky, so I have abandoned the pursuit. I know nothing, which is a reasonable response, again. Okay, my last topic is value. Both sources and collectors agree that what they've got is of value. The issue of writing it down and transmitting it is perhaps a different kind of value, but generally I think that's C. Famously, it's not necessarily the case that the local gentry think that. After hearing singers, I was very anxious to take some down, but the host did not at all like the idea, because he said it would spoil the men very much if they thought they sang anything worth writing down. Well, of course, they were singing stuff that was worth writing down, and some of them thought that. And Cecil Sharp, in a nauseatingly patronising way, spells it out. I'm going to read this out in full because it's so nauseatingly patronising. Imagine then their joy when the collector calls upon them and tells them his love of the old ditties. He has only to convince them of his sincerity to have them at his mercy. They will sing to him in their old quavering voices until they can sing no more. And when he is gone, they will ransack their memories that they may give him of their best, should perchance he call again, as he promised. From the other side, Bob Copper puts it a bit more straightforwardly and emphasises the value of recording. We had a built-in love of these songs, and we didn't want to forget them. My father made a determined effort to ensure that they would be remembered by writing down the words of over 60 of them in what he called his songbook. So there is potentially a relationship of shared value in valuing the material, but also valuing in recording it and passing it on, which some sort of singers may see as important, others might not. And you might think that, going back to Carpenter and Bell Duncan, it's that shared value which kept them working at it, because it does seem to have been a major opus working through her material. But they both knew it was stuff. They both felt that it was stuff that was worth doing, and they were putting value into it. But I've got as my final example a different idea of value, I think. This is Samuel Willett writing to Lucy Broadwood. I desire to acknowledge the receipt of letter and books of songs with many thanks. I cannot see any way clear to be of service to you unless I spend a convenient day at your residence and give a general recital of songs and music. I'm sometimes requested to furnish a song, words and music, for which my usual charge is £0.50. As, however, you would like a considerable variety, say 40 or 50, the task would occupy some days, and then perhaps the whole would hardly be acceptable for circulation. My late father was a man of many songs, of which I've retained to memory about 60, and to indite these with piano accompaniment would involve much time, and consequently a monetary consideration. If it is your wish, I will willingly come to line and assist you in compiling some of the best of my stock, and also I will leave the question of remuneration to your generosity. Now this seems to me a skilled craftsperson making a proposal for a piece of work. In fact, I think you could even read it as one professional addressing another professional. This is someone who has a clear idea of the value of their material, their expertise, and their time, and they're putting it forward. And it's possible that other sources have the same kind of thing. However, this is a village baker talking to a well-read lady in the late 19th century, and in the end Broadwood took 27 songs and gave me 27 shillings for it. Not quite what he was bidding for, but maybe that's the best he could get. Okay, that's a number of anecdotes really, which I think raise some issues and some ideas. So where does that take me? Well, collecting songs is a funny business, and it's silly. These are strange encounters. And in the accounts and the diaries of collectors, and sometimes of the source singers, unfortunately sometimes, I'd love to know more about what they thought about what was going on. Though, I mean, we still have source singers, and we can discuss things with them, which does happen. But there are comments which give us some insight into the social processes involved. I'm an ex-social scientist, and I just find this fascinating for the sake of, looking at it. How that contributes to the study of traditional song, I'm not entirely sure, and you may be in a better position than me to say. But that's something that we can discuss maybe. So that's it. I've put up a slide of references, which obviously you can't see effectively now, but it will be available if people have the PowerPoint later. So, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hugh. That's been a whirlwind tour of some. Well, if anyone here has attempted collecting folk songs, I'm sure you could actually identify with quite a lot, many of the issues that are coming through from your talk there, and add to that social context, historical context, and you've got really a recipe for very intriguing sort of encounters between people, and there's some reflections on this too in the literature. I think we've got time for just one question. We started just a few minutes late. Does anyone have a question or a comment for Hugh? Or has anyone, just hands up, who's done any folk song collecting here in the room? Oh, a few. Okay, so from a position of not having collected, who's been collected from? That'll be the interesting side of it, isn't it? Anyone, comments, questions?
A very quick comment, just to thank you, that was really interesting. Sarah Macon also...
Sorry, my hearing is not very good, so I'll put that here.
It's just a comment, thank you for the talk. Sarah Macon also, like it was Saturday, you were saying, she also liked to do the housework while she was singing, while people were collecting from her. She didn't want to sit down and sing. It maybe that they remember the songs better or feel they're singing unconsciously or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of social things going on, and not stumbling up there and singing the song might be something which is, quite difficult for people. I mean, going back to that list of guidance for the students to begin, it's being sensitive to what the social needs and what's an appropriate tone for this kind of interaction, which will vary from person to person.
Thank you again, Hugh, very much indeed. That's great. Just while we're changing over to Paul, I just wanted to backfill my earlier welcome by saying that I think it is the first traditional song forum meeting where we've been face to face. I'm looking at Martin. Is it the first traditional song forum meeting we've had where we've been face to face for a while? Or maybe we've had one earlier this year. The first one I've been to anyway. But it's also, and this is really important, the first collaboration between the Traditional Song Forum and a new centre here at the University of Sheffield, which is the Centre for Contemporary Folklore Research Centre. I always have to get it the right way around. So it's run by Faye and Kath. Kath, how are you? I lost you. They are in charge of it, and it is a new centre for the study of contemporary folklore and contemporary approaches to folklore, so it sort of ticks both boxes. And maybe if you have any questions about the centre, please do ask Faye. There's a fantastic website with loads of information, SB1.2. There is a reading group that is just starting again if anyone would like to join that, just an online one. And any upcoming events that I need to mention here?
This one.
This one, yeah. Well, you've all got the prize for coming.
Yeah, and we've got some socials, and we're basically just trying to develop new projects, some participatory research stuff where some community and academics are doing research together. So basically just sign up to the website to get research and do.
Lovely, thank you. So it now turns to me to welcome Paul, and he's very efficiently put his own PowerPoint up there. Sorry, I'm not very good at multitasking. So welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us and talking about singing in space, the past, present and future, folk singing environments. And that's equivalent to the previous paper.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Right, hello everybody. So this talk, if you're expecting a highly theorised presentation about spatial dimensions of folk singing, well, I'm sure you'll get that somewhere. But this is not a very kind of theoretical paper. So I'm going to concentrate on some concrete examples. And it's these three. Singing in the pub, where there is no barrier between the singers and the rest of the pub. And that picture is actually from the event that took place in Sheffield in February. The second example I'm going to use is folk clubs as separated spaces, separated out from the rest of the pub when they're held in a pub. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the idea of online space with particular reference to folk clubs that went online during the pandemic. And the underlying ideas here are that space can be regulated or manipulated to assist or constrain participation of various sorts, particularly participation by singers, but also social interaction as well. And then towards the end of the paper, I'll just quickly talk about some of the problems with regard to defining space and whether you can distinguish it from the term place, and also something about interdisciplinary approaches. So the first thing then, this is an example which will be very familiar to many of you in the room, arguably the most over-researched pub in folk studies. So the ship at Blacksall in Suffolk, particularly documented by means of the film that was done there in the mid-1950s, and Jeanette Dunn's book, which I think was published in 1980, but referred to work earlier in the 70s. So that's a still from the 1950s film there. So I don't know how well you can see this. I suspect not brilliantly, but this is my photograph of a page in Dunn's book, and this is a classic ethnomusicologist drawing. I do many of these every year, every time I go to a folk club, so probably about 40 of these a year. I've got notebooks full of the damn things. So this is the 19th of July 1974, and there are named singers sitting at the bottom right of your screen. And the first thing that might occur to you is that they have chosen to sit near the bar, which might seem to be a rather peculiar thing to do from the point of view of audibility, because the bar in a pub is often the most noisy spot. But there were, of course, reasons for that. And although they're not drawn into the picture, at the top of the room, or the top of the drawing, behind Clive Woolnough, whose name you may see there was the dartboard, which was in use during the singing, okay? People were playing darts. And they were using the fruit machine, the gambling machine, that was also in use. And the third thing that was on that particular wall, which fortunately was not in use during the singing, was the jukebox, the enemy of the pub singer. So that's one of the reasons why they were sitting at that end. But there was another reason. So this location is near an American Air Force base. Okay, so you've got a lot of American people in the pub, and in the bottom left, described as the American players, you've got a group of men, including a guitarist and a banjo player, who, according to Dunn's account, had no idea of the etiquette of taking turns in playing music. They would have happily played all night across the singers, stop the singers having a turn. So one of the things that flows from this is, how do you keep order in this kind of situation? Because this is not an event that has a master of ceremonies, okay? There is no MC on this particular night. So Clive Woolnough, a son of one of the singers, informally took on that role at the beginning of the evening and tried to keep the American guitarist and banjo player in check, as it were. As this bar filled up during the evening, other people called for order. Sometimes it was an individual singer, sometimes it was members of the audience, the other people in the bar. So there was a collective but diffuse responsibility for calling order. So some of the other things that I want to draw your attention to in this particular example, the background noise feature would not have been unusual. Those singers would have had many years' experience of singing against background noise, so that's kind of taken for granted. I've already referred to the point about order, but in order to attract the attention, to get people to listen in the bar, the singers used various techniques. They used gestures, they used songs that had choruses that were easy to join in with. They had songs that were associated with them as individuals, songs that they were expected to sing. And they also frequently used comic or risque content in the songs. That doesn't mean that all the songs were like that, but it was used quite frequently. So the kind of space they were in affected their repertoire and their performance style. Now, the other thing that was evident from the drawing is that all the singers were men. And if you read Dunn's book, there's quite a complex history of women singing or not singing in the pub. Quite often they were in the other bar, and it would appear that the tradition about whether they were, in inverted commas, allowed to sing fluctuated over the years. So that's partly to do with social norms in East Anglia at various times. It's partly to do with individual landlords' views about how women should be present in a pub. So it certainly happened at various points in the 20th century that women did sing in the pub, but their involvement tended to be more common if dance music was being played, e.g. on melodeon. And you can see examples of this in the 1950s film. So taking all those factors together, there's quite a complex relationship between the space and what happens in it, and how that's affected by the individuals present on a particular night. So if you move on then to a separated off folk club, and apologies for people who've seen this picture before because I have used this in another presentation. I also notice it's got this kind of stretched quality on the screen, hasn't it? But hopefully you can get the general idea here. It's in a space. There are doors at both ends of the room. It's separated off from the rest of the pub. Now, one of the first things that does is it enables people with quieter voices or with quieter repertoire to perform in a way they would not be able to do if it was a non-separated space. It's also an evening that has a certain degree of formality about it. People, with this particular club, the practice is that people come out to the front to perform, and if you've got particularly good eyesight, because the picture does seem a little bit dark, you will notice that there is indeed a dartboard, as there was at the Ship. Fortunately, the dartboard is not in use in this particular pub at this time because the singer was standing in front of it. So there's a concept of performance space here which kind of adds to the concert-like nature, and also in common with most folk clubs that I'm familiar with, there is a norm about people being quiet while people are singing. So it's attentive listening, there's a possibility for quieter repertoire. And the last point I want to make about this is about the enigmatic phenomenon in folk clubs of tables. For some reason I've got very interested in the role of tables in pubs. So they're very convenient for putting your drinks on. You know, you're doing it all yourselves, aren't you? You've all got drinks on the table. But at this particular venue, and this club wasn't meeting in this particular pub for very many years, but at this particular time, the club was attracting an attendance that filled the room. So I'm not sure how clear it is from the picture, which doesn't show the whole room, of course, but it was pretty crowded. So if you wanted to manipulate the space in the sense that you wanted to sit in a particular way, or you had particular views about where your table should be and that kind of thing, not really possible to change the layout. And indeed it wasn't really possible excuse me, to move around the room very easily, because there would be consequences if you tried to move. For example, guitars falling over, or you falling over one of the at least 2 dogs that were present on that night, you know, which were usually having a good doze listening to the music. And as you know, you should let sleeping dogs lie. So the problem that caused was not a musical problem. A packed room is actually pretty good for good chorus singing. But if you wanted to talk to people other than the person you were sitting next to, it wasn't so good. And people have actually commented on how that room was from that point of view. You couldn't get round the room, is the way that somebody put it to me. So it was an effect on the social interaction rather than the musical interaction. Lastly, it was an event run by a master of ceremonies. You can't see him, actually he's just kind of behind my head, with his notebook with the order of performance determined by him, just about visible behind my Guinness. So there you go. So there are, as with other folk clubs, there are implicit, sometimes explicit, but often implicit rules about how an evening is conducted. And some of those are affected by room size and layout. And there may be limited opportunities for the people present to actually change those. So the combination of the informal rules of the pub and the space and the layout do affect what goes on. So lastly then, the online era. Now you'll be very familiar with this, I guess most of you, the gallery view in Zoom. So it's the same, excuse me, it's the same Nottinghamshire Folk Club as the one we've just been looking at. This is it during the pandemic. So it used Facebook Watch Party to begin with, and then it changed its platform to Zoom. So I'm on the top row emceeing that particular night. I've used a backdrop, and because I'm MC, I've worn a tie for the occasion. Not something I would have done in a physical setting. So already, you know, that's an example of people changing behaviour because of its online space rather than physical space. So one of the key things that I've observed about Zoom is people's level of self-awareness, or lack of self-awareness, in the sense that they're on camera all the time. So you can choose active speaker view and just listen to the person who's singing, or you can keep it on gallery view, and you see people talking on the phone, having their tea, falling asleep. I'm not sure that I've seen anything more violent or more intimate on gallery view, but certainly it's interesting that this access to the domestic environment seems to be something that people are almost unaware of, and there's this very peculiar blurring of domestic and public space that happens online. I found it on the few occasions when I emceed those Zoom sessions, I found it quite difficult actually. The MC obviously has certain powers, technical facilities available to them in terms of muting to control what you might call the audio space, but you can't really present how people's visual appearance is visible to the rest of the club. You know, there's a lot of user control, you might say, about the visual appearance. So I was wondering about whether this would have any long-term effects. I must admit, I've not seen, since those sorts of clubs have returned to the physical club, I've not actually seen anybody walking in with a portable backdrop. You know. I've not seen that. People did perform in costume, which does occasionally happen in a physical folk club, but it's more likely when it's a Christmas event or something. Some people got very heavily into the special effects. Hugh, who we've just heard from, I think once appeared on a video with that club, and where there were 7 of him singing in harmony on a Copper Family song. Yeah. Hugh cannot turn up with 7 versions of himself to a physical club, so there are a lot of differences. But I did wonder whether people would bring back some kind of experience about performing online that might affect their performance elsewhere. But I think this is kind of a generational thing, so there's 2 different things happening here. There's people who migrated from the physical space to the online space and then migrated back. Now they might think differently about their own performance, having perhaps videoed or recorded rehearsals or uploaded videos to the online folk clubs. And that might make them think differently, have different standards almost about their performance back in the, in inverted commas, real world. But perhaps more importantly, younger generations for whom the online performance was perhaps always more of a frequent thing than the performance in some kind of live performance space. So there must be quite a lot of people who've recorded on YouTube and similar platforms who have rarely been, or perhaps not been at all, to a folk club or open mic or other things. So just an interesting point about the future, about whether the increased use of online will have any implications for the way that people use physical space. Right, okay, I'm doing quite well for time here. I shall move on to my sort of more academic bit at the end. So I came across this literature called Music, Space and Place, and it sits within the the sociology of popular music, or cultural sociology, if you like. And it seems to be something that's grown out of a literature about music scenes. So if you're familiar, for example, with the writer Andy Bennett, he is someone who's written about music scenes, who's gone on now to write about space and place. But what I found about this was that there didn't seem to be consistent usage of the two words, place and space. So, bearing in mind that this work did come out of previous work about music scenes, you won't be surprised to hear that some of this material focuses on particular cities or towns, or it focuses on particular ethnic minority groups in particular locations. So you might look at the African Caribbean population in London and the reggae scene and that kind of thing, and look at place and space in that way. Because of what I was writing about, I wanted in a way to distinguish between place and space, and the way that I came up with distinguishing them was that for me, place meant a single location in a wider network of locations. Okay, so Peter Webb's chapter on Massive Attack and Portishead and the Bristol trip-hop scene in the Whiteley and colleagues volume, he talks about Bristol as a whole, and then he talks about particular venues within Bristol. Now, I think, for me, place is how that venue fits or is distinguished from the wider ecology, if you like, of the performance spaces that surround it geographically. And this links with some of the stuff that Faye's written about in terms of networks and communities. Space, for me, is more what happens internally within the four walls. Okay? So it's an internal focus, whereas place is to do with that place's external relationships, how it fits into the local music scene. But that is a distinction which I have made up. I don't find that distinction, or indeed any other consistent distinction within the literature. So it's kind of a bit of an odd one in terms of lack of definitions there. The other thing that struck me about this literature is that how many different disciplines were involved in it. So although, as I said, this is a literature that's primarily cited within sociology, if you look at the Whiteley, Bennett and Hawkins volume and the Stahl and Percival ones, you've got people from a geographical background, media studies, and perhaps unsurprisingly, architecture. So I decided to compare that to the kind of disciplines that contribute to Ethnomusicology Forum Journal. Unsurprisingly, most of the people who write for that journal are ethnomusicologists. Hooray! But you also get people from a visual arts, film studies, folklore, music education backgrounds. And I found that, I thought, okay, well, that's quite interesting. So how does that differ, if it differs, from the community of folk music studies? And of course, today is really interesting from that point of view. I do have an ethnomusicology degree, the traditional music degree here at Sheffield, but I started out as a historian. Hugh's a social psychologist. We've got people coming up after the break who are variously archaeologists, poets and molecular biologists, I believe. So it's certainly not the case that the community present here today is not multidisciplinary. But I did think that the kind of approaches used in this music space and place literature, it might be interesting to consider how those kind of inputs would be helpful to folk music studies, particularly if you think this thing about looking at venues and spaces and places is of use. But anyway, that's me just about done. It's not coming in slightly under time. So thank you very much, and here's my reference list. Thank you.
Thank you for your magnificent timekeeping as well. That's great. So we do actually have time for some questions if anyone would like to talk to Paul a bit. Comments about, I mean, it was a very reflective, I thought, and thoughtful sort of idea, and looking at that, the space in lots of different kind of performance contexts and singing setups, if you like, you know, so, and the rules that go with that space. And I mean, one of the things from architecture, I wonder if you come across is that whole idea of affordance, that a space lends you certain qualities so you can use them in different ways, and the online space that applies to that as well. So that's a concept I found quite, you know, sort of handy in terms of looking at those sorts of things. That's beyond.
Oh, I'm just trying to. Very interesting. One thing that I was thinking about was that move to online during COVID and how that then translates back to the in-person. And during that time, I was working at the English Folk and Song Society and was in charge of their choir, the Central Sharp House Choir. And one thing we found was that after a year online, people sang much better. And also, everybody suddenly knew each other's names. And some had been in the choir for years and had not learned each other's names. So when they finally got together again, the choir as a whole, or the part of the choir who decided to try online, which was about 2/3, was much, much more equipped to be able to do things in person. Did you find it to be similar with your folk club? That it was a bit more brought together?
Yes, in terms of bringing people together, definitely yes. It varies from club to club, but the Beast of Folk Club that I've spoken about on the outskirts of Nottingham, they introduced some really interesting things when they used Facebook Watch Parties. So they got that worked on the basis of people uploading videos. Okay, it wasn't live like Zoom. You uploaded videos, but they also got singers to interview other singers, and this people strongly remarked that as a result of the kind of things that were going on in Facebook Watch Party, they knew much more about the singers who went to the club. That was very marked. Where I think it's a little bit more difficult to say how the online experience has translated back into the physical club, I'm not quite sure that it's really evident in terms of performance. So your point about the choir singing actually improving is quite an interesting one. Although it also raises another point about how other musical activities fit with people's folk club activities. Because one of the things I've become interested in very recently is how many people who go to a folk club also participate in other things. Choirs, brass bands, this, that and the other. And of course, experiences with those during the pandemic might have been quite different to experiences with a folk club during the pandemic. So there's some quite rich material out there, which has been written about a bit. The top one, if you Google Benford, Mansfield and Spence performing liveness, you'll see a lengthy essay from a computer science perspective, actually, that one. So yes, very interested in the effect of the pandemic.
Thank you. Yeah, fruitful question. Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Or does it speak to any of your experiences? John, and then Hugh.
Just I wanted to comment on the difference between the online space and the physical space. Because for me, reflecting on the experience of going online and coming back again, there was a different emphasis when you were online. The emphasis was on you as an individual performer singing. And when you perform in the space, the acoustics of that space and feeling a lift from chorus singing gives the whole experience a different emphasis. So I wondered if that's been reflected, because I do think Zoom was great, but it did put the emphasis very much on individual performance rather than collective community harmonisation and singing.
Yes, well, one of the big issues with the online performance is, of course, this lack of chorus singing for technical limitations. And many people were very, very glad to go back, it has to be said, both from the point of view of being able to sing choruses and from the social side. But it's also interesting that people acknowledged that the online experience was also important socially. And sometimes people seem to be emphasising it kept us together socially more than saying anything particularly positive about the musical value online. So that's quite interesting.
And just also, yes, so we've got Hugh and then we've Faye. Oh, is it a quick one, Hugh, quick one, Faye, and then we must break for coffee.
Maybe a yes or no answer. There's an issue about the micro-analysis, the Jeanette Dunn thing. Some clubs require that people go up to the front to sing. Some clubs require that people stand up around the room. Some clubs it's normal that people sing from a city. Do you have any idea that kind of variation is significant and is worth looking at? It is okay to say no.
I think it is significant. I think the thing about coming out to the front to sing makes you more of a performer with a capital P than singing from where you're sitting. And certainly the club that I go to most frequently, where I live in Derbyshire, it's a sing where you're sitting club. And it's got quite a different vibe to it. I think in some ways the vibe is not so good because people are blocked off from the rest of the room because they're sitting behind tables. There goes my table obsession again. But yeah, I mean, coming out to the front definitely makes you more of a performer. You've got to project and you've got to have more confidence, I think, as well.
Go on, Faye. Just the last one there, absolutely last one.
I'm probably expecting a whole answer, I suppose, but I was just thinking the three contexts are so very different. Is it that there's a common thing that they're trying to do and they look so different because they have to make accommodations to achieve the common thing that they're trying to achieve? Or are they all very different? Do they become different things because of the context that they're in? Are they so is there a common aim or are there three different aims? And the big P and little p thing. So you can't answer that really.
That's two questions. Let's have the first.
Well, I think just a quick point on this. The thing that they've got in common, which I suppose is the underlying rationale for the presentation, is that the environment affects what happens. Yeah? And the environment affects what happens in different ways because it's got the three examples have got different levels of user control, performer control, you know, the whole thing about emceeing, background noise, that kind of thing. And the physical constraints, or in the online environment, the technical constraints, also affect what's happening. So these things are never about individual decisions about repertoire and performance, because there are all these environmental factors that surround those performances.
Great, thank you. The affordances, some of the affordances, in fact, sounds to be. Thank you so much, Paul. That's been amazing.